Well, we'll see how this goes. Um, I'm gonna get straight into it. It looks like there from the weekend there has already been cases of people looting. Now, I can't say definitively that it's because SNAP benefits ended or whether it's just the bit of looting that's been going on for the past 2 years anyway. But I do find it a positive correlation to the ending of SNAP benefits and the avowed statements of people saying that they were going to go out and steal if their benefits ended. So I'm going to assume that because those things are have a strong association with each other, that they are connected. I'm putting that in the nicest way possible. But don't worry, I'm not going to be nice throughout this. Um, Waiting for the chat room to fill in for people who are going to watch this on replay. Uh, but yeah, I've seen reports already. Some of you probably have as well. There's been some looting over the weekend. So coming right out of Halloween, my favorite holiday, November 1st, which actually is a holiday itself, All Saints Day, which if people know the etymology of the word Halloween, you know that it was the eve of another holiday anyway. It was Saint All Hallows Eve, which also is the eve of All Saints Day. So All Saints Day is big amongst Roman Catholics, maybe Eastern Orthodox, I'm not sure, and Coptic Christians, I'm not sure. I think Coptics and Orthodox celebrate it, but I know Roman Catholics do. And particularly, I forgot my hat. That's what I wanted. And particularly, um, in the Philippines, they make a big thing of All Saints Day because All Saints Day is also Day of the Dead for them. So just like if you know a lot of Latinos, particularly Mexicans, who celebrate Dia de los Muertos, and I think I'm saying that incorrectly, but Day of the Dead, the Philippines does it as well because being that they were a Spanish colony longer than Mexico was, believe it or not. Some people don't know that, but there was a lot of uh, cross. Uh, there was a lot of trans-Pacific trade between um, I would say not even trans-Pacific, transocean, trans uh, both trans-Pacific and transatlantic trade going between Spain, Mexico, and the Philippines. So much so that you had conquistadors uh, coming to Mexico with Philippine Philippine sailors, Filipino sailors, and you had Spaniards bringing Aztecs over to the Philippines. So there there's a lot of cultural connection between Mexico and the Philippines and Spain. So they also celebrated Dia de los Muertos. Although, like I said, they just call it Day of the Dead since most Filipinos don't speak Spanish. Surprising, but no, most of them don't speak Spanish. They speak uh, Tagalog. Well, they speak Filipino, which is mostly Tagalog, but it also has a lot of uh, borrowings from Spanish and English because pure Tagalog is is spoken in other parts of the country, but the national language itself is based on Tagalog, but it's not the same thing as pure Tagalog. I guess sort of like during the Roman Empire, you had vulgar Latin, which is what everyone throughout the empire spoke, vulgar Latin. But then like the pure uh, high Latin was spoken by the nobility. So anyway, unlike over there in the Philippines, where they were celebrating All Saints Day on November 1st, or in Mexico, uh, people chose to spend All Saints Day here in America looting stores because, and mind you, they've only ran out of the benefits for one day, just literally one day, and they're already looting. One day. And it cracks me up seeing these fat women online complaining about how they're going to feed themselves and their children. Like, you are shaped like Jabba the Hutt, and you're talking about you are going to starve. I'm pretty sure you could survive off your abdominal fat itself for, for 30 days. Just drink water and you'll be fine. Like, to see someone morbidly obese complaining about they're going to starve is just freaking hilarious. And no, it's not just black women because my friend and I had a chat about that. I told him though that yeah, I'm quite aware that this isn't just black women getting online complaining, but when you see them doing it, it reinforces the stereotype going all the way back to the 80s of the so-called welfare queen, which is and the prototype of the welfare queen was a fat black woman. And so every time people hear someone complaining about losing their SNAP benefits, that is the injured that's excuse me, that is the image that is conjured in their mind is that of a fat black woman complaining about their SNAP benefits ending, even though most of the people on SNAP benefits are, people who are the elderly and disabled, and many of these fine folks and not so fine folks are white. Call it what it is. Many of them are white. Many of them are Latino. Now, the conservatives and the far right nationalists do have a point, though, that when people try to say, "Well, yeah, it's more white people on welfare," and when they're saying welfare, they're speaking both of the SNAP program, and Section 8 housing. So I want to be clear because when people say welfare, like we need to know what they're talking about. They're talking about like either SNAP benefits or Section 8 housing, right? And so, many pro black people will be quick to say, "Hey, it's actually more white people on these welfare programs than black people," which is true. Hey, Agatha, um, which is true. It is more white people on it, but but this is why statistics and probability become so important because we have to distinguish between we got to distinguish between relative figures and absolute figures. So in absolute figures, yes, there are more white people on welfare programs because there's more white people genuine generally throughout the country, right? Black people make up roughly about 13% of the population. But therein lies the rub because when you look at it in relative figures, yes, there's less black people on these programs, but per capita is more people in the black population using these programs. So that's sort of the problem. So, like I said, you can look at it from absolute numbers or relative numbers, and it's going to get you whatever like people want to say about it. Um, but it's important to look at it in relative numbers, which is look, yes, there's more white people on welfare programs, SNAP and SNAP, WIC, which is specifically for like um, infant children, right? So there's SNAP, WIC, and Section 8, right? I think there's other programs, but those are the three big ones that most people think of when they think of welfare: the SNAP program, aka food stamps, the WIC, and Section 8. Um, and look, although there's more of them that are white that's using it in relative figures, there's more black people because being that we are a smaller population, we are within the general population, we're overrepresented in usage of those programs. Per capita R means per. It's just a fancy Latin way of saying per person. So in relative figures, like it's it's saying in other words, if black people are 13% of so okay, if there's like 330 million people in the US currently. And so currently there are 40 million on uh using like this on welfare, and I'm talking specifically here of the SNAP benefits, right? So there's 40 million people out of 30 million using the SNAP program. Now, we can say, well, yeah, but most of them are white. Okay, cool, but yeah, white people in absolute numbers are going to be overrepresented in generally anything in society because they are the majority uh, ethnic population. uh, Black people are a ethnic minority, and we're not even the biggest minority anymore. Latinos, um, Latino, Hispanic people have now become the largest minority, and we were warned that was going to happen 20 years ago. That they were going to outpace Black people as the largest ethnic minority in the country, and they have. Um, so we're sitting at about 13% of the population. So if out of those 40 million people, say, and I'm making up numbers here because I don't know the absolute breakdown. I mean, we can Google it if you like, but if if a quarter of that 40 million people are black people and we're only 13% of the population, that means they would be overrepresented in using those programs, right? I guess is what do you think about those resperse? I don't know what that means. Resperse. Maybe that might be a typo. Or says I don't think they understand as much as they know. It will kind of disprove and void their argument. He said like Latinos are way more pro-life than the black community. That's why their numbers are growing. That well, that that's a different subject. We can get into that lot later because that's gonna take us too far askew. And this is already like convoluted enough. Like so, like I said, in absolute numbers, yes, white people make up more of the people using these welfare programs. So we can talk about SNAP, WIC, Section 8, and others, and the other programs out there. However, in relative figures, black people per capita are overrepresented in using these programs, right? It and it doesn't behoove a lot of black people to go online and sit there complaining about their SNAP benefits and going to get cut off because all you're doing is making it easier for those who already don't dislike who already bear grudges that black people get just skating by on life through you know racial you know uh, racial victim politics and stuff like that. This is what strengthens people aligning with people like Nick Fuentes and his groypers, or with other far white nationalists, or ultra conservatives and so forth, is that you have these fat black women coming on to TikTok talking about they cutting off our stamps, how I'm gonna feed myself, and they like fucking 300, 400 pounds. It's like, and it's like everyone looks at that and they feel like Negan in The Walking Dead. He came to one of those he came to one of those communities and said we're gonna double up the amount of food that you have to contribute. And this fat woman was like, but how are we gonna feed ourselves? And he looked at her like, really? And she just ran off and started crying. That's the state of what we're in with these SNAP benefits. You got these fat like these fat black women are doing a disservice to people who actually need these programs, because like I said, despite you seeing these fat women come on to TikTok and YouTube complaining, the majority of these people, whether black or white, are elderly and disabled who are using these benefits. All of like many of us have aunties who are on these programs. Many of us have, aunties, elderly family members, or they might be so themselves using these programs. Um, and they do them a disservice by coming on here complaining, showing that they're just lazy and fat. Like, you're 300 pounds. You're not about to starve anytime fucking soon. As far as your 4 children, where the fuck is the baby's children's? I mean, the baby's father's at. Um, like it's basically meant it's emotional manipulation. Like, you want us to feel bad for a program that a lot of people would like to see modified, or or if not outright eradicated, because of people like that. Even though, like I said, it's meant to benefit people who are elderly and disabled, or through some other sort of misfortune cannot work. But for those people who are not the elderly and disabled, it's meant to be a temporary relief, not a permanent state of affairs that they just live off for the remainder of their their working working lifespan, the lifespan, the time in which they could be, that they're able bodied. Like, seeing an able bodied person complaining about their SNAP benefits being cut off just hits poorly, right? Even worse, it was men doing it as well. Like, it was literally a guy talking about he's not going to go to work, so he needs his SNAP benefits for he and his 2 kids. Like, how are you an able-bodied fucking man in your 30s and you already have 2 children, And it's like no one feels sorry for him. None. No. Like we might feel sorry initially for a woman, but we have zero tolerance for a guy who has children talking about he needs SNAP. Like, no, nigga, you need to work. You are not disabled and you are not elderly. On top of that, we need to bring back dick discipline. Like, well, not just dick discipline, sexual discipline for both men and women. Like, if you are not at an income level where you can take care of yourself, you shouldn't even be having children. This is why I've always thought the eugenics was not necessarily a bad idea. It was just poorly implemented. Some people should not be having children. People, and I know I'm going to tick people off, and I might even tick off the algorithm of YouTube here, but yeah, like if you have a low IQ, and when I say low IQ, I mean like 80, like 85 and less, probably shouldn't be having children. If you have a genetic, if if you have a mental illness, which is highly hereditary, probably shouldn't have kids. If you are too indigent to take care of yourself, probably shouldn't have kids. If you are a lifetime criminal, probably shouldn't have kids. Now, that's not to say we should force these people into sterility programs or anything like that, but perhaps we can incentivize them through tax breaks and or just direct cash transfers that they don't have kids. Like if you're at a point where you can't even take care of yourself, why should you be having kids? But you want to emotionally manipulate people after the fact that your dumbass had a bunch of crotch goblins that you can't take care of, that you expect taxpayers to take care of. People grow intolerant of that, and it's because of this financial frustration right now that leads to the rise of people like Nick Fuentes. Agnes says, sorry, I meant those guys not working that are at home. Why is the speaker not calling them back to Washington? Uh, I'm not sure what you mean. The speaker of the House. I mean, I'm not sure what you mean, but in Washington, they ended a lot of that hybrid work last year. Like when when Elon Musk was put at the head of what was that program? The whatever that program is called. He basically called for the end of hybrid work in DC. So a lot of that hybrid work that people was doing throughout the, the, the early 2020s up until 2023, 2024, a lot of that hybrid work has ended, if that's what you mean. uh, R says the House hasn't been called back because they already passed the budget, and until the Senate passes something, if that's what you were talking about, Agatha. He's saying to Agatha. Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah. So as far as I know, Congress has worked what 15 out of 90 days, and Congress, both the Senate and the House, still get paid while the government is shut down. And seriously, I don't even like the term shut down anymore because it's bullshit. The the government isn't shut down if one, essential services are still being met out. Two, they're still collecting taxes. And three, uh, our our elected leaders are still getting paid. That to me, that's not a true shutdown. What we have is a government reduction of services. On top of that, they found a way to pay the military. Um, and so two federal judges have recently told the president that he must use emergency funds to keep the SNAP program going, um, which I mean, I guess I don't have a problem with that for the simple fact that the government didn't run out of money. It's just not they just shut down services. Like I said, it's not that the government ran out of money because when you think government shutdown, you think, oh shit, the government can't fund itself anymore. No, they're still funding itself because they're still collecting taxes. So it's not from a lack of of funds that these programs and agencies have shut down. So I have no problem with with two federal judges ruling that the president must keep the, the program going because, like I said, we look we can make fun of these fat women complaining about their food stamps. We can shake shake our fist into the high heavens about some able-bodied man with children saying he refuses to work and he wants his food stamps, and we can, you know, clean off our firearms and get them ready, put on our nightstands and get our little kydex holsters, to clip to our pants when we walk out during the day when we have to go shopping in case something goes down. But we still need to remember the, the, the kids don't deserve to starve because of what people are doing. Once people see kids starving, that would make matters much worse. It would make it would make matters much worse. Oh, JR says, "What's good? What's up?" Ours is not just fat black women; it's liberal white women too. I'm white. I see these things myself. Oh no, 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 I completely agree with you. That's like I said. This was the the dispute I was having with my friend earlier, and I told him I completely acknowledge the fact that there's also fat white women and fat Latino women who are taking advantage of these programs. What I was saying to him is that in when to the average person, the prototype of someone on welfare is a fat black woman because of the efforts of the Reagan administration back in the 80s when he was running for reelection, saying that he would put an end to the welfare queen. And ever since the 80s, that has stuck in people's mind that the average welfare recipient is some lazy fat black woman, even though that's not true. Like I said, the average welfare recipient is elderly and disabled, whether black or white or Latino. So I guess my feelings with those programs is if money can be sent overseas without taxes, why not feed our kids and the other vulnerable people? Yeah. The thing is, though, that money was set aside for different purposes, but I completely agree. You remember how I raged out the other day talking about why the fuck are we sending $40 billion to Argentina, which is a completely useless country to our to to our national security. Like there, and because I don't, I mean, I don't want to be mean, but who cares about Argentina? Seriously, who cares about them? Sending 40 billion to them, while to me that just the optics of that was just so bad to send $40 billion to Argentina during this time period right now when people are worried about jobs, worried about the prices of food, and now you cut off programs to help them feed themselves. It's not a good look, especially to Argentina, man. Fuck Argentina. Like all I remember of them is that they harbored Nazis during world after the end of World War II. JR says government assistance wasn't meant to be a way of life. Government assistance was to fill in a gap when people fell on hard times. Absolutely. And I mean, let's be clear. Welfare has worked. Seeing black people crash out over welfare programs shows why so many people in the red pill and black manosphere spaces are correct. How a lot of men in the black manosphere said, our women basically traded, you know, stable families for free housing and food. Um, and I remember Malcolm X speaking in his autobiography that he said, if there was anything that has ever ruined black families because it ruined his, it was welfare. He spoke about how welfare used to be back when he was a child in the uh I guess in the 40s, um 30s or 40s, because I think he was a little bit older than Martin Luther King. So I think in like the late 30s, early 40s, being a child in Detroit after his father was murdered by white supremacists, and seeing how the welfare system completely destroyed his family. His mom ended up going into a mental institution. He and his siblings were separated, um, living in orphanage and stuff like that. Um, and of course, one of the reasons why is because, look, if these women are on welfare, they can't have a man in the house. So, uh, Real CP says the problem is overall it is more Hispanics that get a lot of freebies, food stamps, DACA, free health for the crumb snatchers that many don't pay anything, let alone various illegal ones. Oh yeah, yeah, and then that's another issue, which is the reason why a lot of people are leaving the Democrat. A lot of black men are leaving the Democratic Party. It's like you're only doing stuff that benefit black women. Number one, and then two, you're giving resources were that were asked for the black community for decades and never. And people always said you couldn't do it, and now you're doing it willingly for illegal aliens. And then you seeing these black politicians willing to crash out and even go to jail to to support illegal aliens. So yeah, absolutely. And then, like I said, and then when you see them receiving SNAP benefits and cash assistance, because that's another program, the temporary cash assistance. So, like I said, there's a lot of welfare programs like I said, there's SNAP, there's WIC, there's Section 8, there's the temporary cash assistance. Like these people were having like thousands of dollars on both their food and cash benefits. And it's like, what? Like everyone remembers that. Like people don't forget that easily. We don't forget that someone took a snapshot of someone's receipt in Walmart that they dropped and they had $10,000 in like cash benefits and about 5,000 in food benefits on their Snap card. 10,000. This is just one person. There's hundreds of thousands. Look, there's hundreds of thousands of them here. Well, actually, about a million or so of them here illegally. Imagine how many of them are getting similar assistance like that. Then they were being, then even some places they were given affordable housing. California, they almost set up a program where they were gonna give them they were gonna start a housing program that reduced the cost of the housing significantly just for them. In California, one of the most expensive housing markets in the country, if not the world. Like anytime two MD doctors, I think they were both Asian. I don't know if they were Chinese or what. They were an Asian couple. Both were MD holding doctors, saying that they couldn't afford to buy a house in California. Now, if you rub two doctors together, you're looking at about 500,000 easily, if not more. And for them to say they couldn't afford to find housing, but yet they are going to, and then here's the other rub with that. The reason why housing is so expensive is simply because they won't build more. You have, and I know people get tired of me trashing boomers. Boomers have affected zoning restrictions and other sorts of things that benefit them to keep their houses more valuable while denying housing to people. And they're saying, oh, there's a housing shortage. What is the common sense thing to do if there's a housing shortage? Build more fucking houses. But through zoning restrictions and other sorts of things, they won't do so, driving up the value of those homes already there while depriving younger people of the ability to buy their first homes. Meanwhile, in this whole in this whole kerfuffle, then they're going to give those give initiate a program to make it easier for illegal aliens to acquire housing over working Americans. The chutzpah. So anyway, I don't want to go into the immigration thing too much. I've talked about that before. Let's get back to the SNAP benefits and the looting. But I'm gonna go through these comments first. Hara says, I don't think it's the federal government's job to give benefits. It's up to the community. I donated my church, volunteered at the food bank. I want the government out of my pockets. And I hear that. I hear that. I look, I'm not against the government giving out benefits because when it when it as we get to a point where there's more extreme income inequality, and look, I'm willing because then the question becomes what is an acceptable amount of income inequality. I accept there will always be income inequality. That's just for various reasons. One is that people of different abilities are going to rise to the top and others are going to sink. That's one. um, Two, there's going to be, unfortunately, there's always going to be some different sort of social inequities amongst different groups as well. Three is that we have given rise to a cognitive elite, which was talked about 30 years ago back in the in the bell curve. Um, we have a cognitive elite now that is surpassing, but also merging with the financial elite. So the cognitive elite are a bunch of people who are highly educated and involved in the tech world. They are becoming the most successful people in society, and they are largely merging with the wealthy elite, right? So it's the wealthy elite and the cognitive elite become one. That's going to leave a lot of people in mired in poverty, or in or of the worker class. And so it makes sense that from an economic perspective, we can trade off the efficiency of the market a bit for some social welfare to ensure that the least of us are still covered for two reasons, for both moral and pragmatic reasons. The moral reason obviously is that we shouldn't allow people to starve to death or go, or to be unhoused, because that's just simply that that would simply be a morally it, it, it it would be morally impermissible for a society to have an elite where you have them with the bulk of everything and everyone else is left to their own devices. That that basically puts us that would basically put us back into the state of feudalism from which we escaped, you know, 600 years ago, right? Um, we don't want to go back to feudalism or you know mercantilism, because mercantilism was like sort of the precursor to a capitalist economy. We don't want to go back to those. But if we have extreme income inequality and no buffer, which is social welfare, then we go back to a state of feudalism. We don't, and people have already talked about that. By the way, they've already talked about corporate feudalism. We don't want that to be the case. All right. So that's the moral case against saying we shouldn't have any sort of social welfare benefits. Then there's the pragmatic reason. A society like that can would be highly unstable because the have-nots. It has been the one of the things that Karl Marx has well documented, in his books, whether Das Kapital or his his magnus opus, uh, struggling uh, to remember the name of his first big book, but his magnus opus, whatever, which is just a fancy way of saying his big book. But anyway, um, in that he well documented the history of class struggle. I mean, so much so that he kind of coined the term, I think, class struggle. And it has always been the case that the have-nots, when taken to a point of desperation, will overthrow the ones who have all the goods, and then we'll just then that will just be a continuous cycle. In order for that not to happen, to keep American society stable and thriving, there has to be social welfare. I'm not saying we have to be like Norway, but there has to be some social welfare. At the same time, we can't allow people to abuse those programs so much so that it causes the folks who are just in between the lower working class and the elite to to feel such frustration that things also go awry as well. Like that's the other way around. Like we don't want either extreme. We don't want the extreme of cutting off all social welfare benefits, and then we don't want the extreme of giving so much that people just get comfortable living off the taxpayer's dollar. Like we don't want either of those extremes. But I think we could do with a reduction of certain things. Certainly. JR says yes. The government doesn't make money. The government takes money. True. That's facts. Uh, the real CP says plus how many cities and towns um, um, do non-blacks where they are dependent of food stamps. Let me try to. I think this was miswritten, so I'm trying to. Let me try to clear it up. So he said, plus how many cities and towns um, where non-blacks are dependent of food stamps. A lot of conversation is not talked about on that. R says 48% of Hakeem Jeffrey's district is on some form of assistance. How does that make sense? This gets into what I was saying earlier, R. That's what I was saying. Like, people, like I said, a lot of pro blacks and people who support these social welfare programs will be quick to say, well, it's mostly white people on it. And then they forget, all of a sudden they become ignorant of probability and statistics, or they actually are ignorant of probability and statistics and forget that black people are still overrepresented in these programs because of their relative numbers compared to the absolute numbers. So yeah, in absolute numbers, there's more white people in those programs, but in relative numbers, there's more black people in it because we are a smaller part of the population who are overrepresented using these programs. So yeah, and like I said, it rubs people wrongly when they see certain folks taking advantage, from their perspective, taking advantage of the system. This pushes people to the far right. So uh Jared says they have kids to get the benefits. Yeah. R says thank you. No problem. Like I'm trying to be fair, guys. I mean, I have my biases as well, but I'm trying to be as fair and balanced on this as I can. That's why I become like a real nerd about like behavioral statistics, because we all have our biases, but when we can point to, you know, data, facts, and statistics, we can talk more. We can talk more accurately about things, right? Real CP says we need to enforce immigration laws. How many illegals popping out, pawn kids getting food stamps? That definitely is not talked about enough. I mean, it's talked about. I mean, that like I said, this was a major issue going into the election last November, and it's fueled that, the animus of many people in Middle America for why they supported ICE, as well as Border Patrol. And some people don't even know, like, people don't even confuse the two. They're different organizations, but well, they're both under Department of Homeland Security. But um, another thing people don't acknowledge is that often a lot of these people in ICE and Border Patrol themselves are come from those same communities. So Doge, yeah, that was the that's what I was trying to think of earlier. When Elon was head of Doge, they were had getting into some of those things that we were just discussing 10-15 minutes ago. Recipe says Fuentes is nothing more than a wannabe Anglo. There's no black equivalent. So apparently, even though his name is Nick Fuentes, apparently he's Italian, which is funny. Which is why he says he supports people like Stalin and Hitler and who was the guy in Italy? The forgot his name, but it's ironic because like I've mentioned before, Italians for a long time weren't considered white people, which is why they found themselves in the criminal underworld along with Irish people, Jewish people, Greeks, um, Turks, and other immigrants that came out of either Southern or Eastern Europe, because many of these people, immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe weren't considered white people originally. So I find it funny that he talks all this trash, and I think Nick Fuentes is a closeted maggot. Replace M with the F. He has those vibes that he's one of those closeted maggots, and he's also friends with that blue haired bitch. Um, what's the guy's name? The liberal, which is also funny. Why is this guy who's such a staunch Democratic liberal friends with a far white nationalist? Something doesn't ring right about that. And we know that Destiny, that's the name, and we know that Destiny is bisexual and he's a cuck. And last year he was caught sucking someone's dick. Like they they put the pictures on the internet for showing, and he admitted, he's like, yeah, I guess, he said he said I can't he said I can't argue my way out of this. I guess I was caught. I'm like, so you just gonna freely admit, yeah, you was just sucking dick and that's cool? I was like, no wonder your wife was was cuckold and you and eventually got divorced from me. She probably doesn't want to be married to some little blue haired maggot who sucks dudes' dicks. I mean, anyway, I don't want to go too far askew. um, yeah, a far white nationalist like Nick Fuentes and a staunch liberal Democrat like Destiny being buddies seems oddly weird to me. And and being the Destiny again is gay, or I should say bisexual, whatever. I and don't we have not heard of Nick Fuentes with any women. Just saying, he seems like one of those closeted maggots that we often find in these incel far far right type communities. Just saying. But he said there's no black equivalent who talks like him. They would be canceled. KKK Fuentes is allowed to speak hate. No, there's some extreme black people. There's definitely some extreme black people who talk like him. And the thing is, they're allowed to get away with it because often people act like white people can't be, because there's this assumption, particularly on the left, whether you're talking about liberals, progressives, um, center, left leaning, whatever, there's a sentiment amongst those different groups on the left that you can't be racist towards white people. And in doing so, there are a lot of pro-black um, and hotep type guys who say some wild stuff. Like I hear, I've heard and I've read online black people saying some vile stuff about white people, Jewish people, Latino people, Asian people. So no, there's definitely black people um, who spill very vile stuff similar to Nick Fuentes. The only difference is they don't have the platform that he has. His platform has grown in the past year or two, mainly because trying to deplatform him off of social media basically made him a martyr amongst people who already have a lot of racial grievances. And then, like I said, with what was going on with the illegal aliens, with what people felt about the Israeli Palestine, the Israeli, there's Hamas war, um, what people are thinking about, you know, of people who they think are the main benefactors of welfare, all sort of stuff feeds into that racial grievance. And the issue is the issue with anyone spewing hate. Look, I'm a free speech advocate, number one. So I'm always going to say, you know, or remind people that hate speech is a protected form of speech. People forget that. They think hate speech isn't protected under free speech laws. In America, it is. Hate speech is a protected form of speech. What is not protected is speech that incites violence. That sort of speech is not protected. You cannot use speech that incites violence, but hate speech itself is a protected form of speech. So the now private entities, whether you're talking about Google or Meta, um, or TikTok or Twitter, they can do what they want on their platforms. They can choose to not let these people be on their platforms. But the problem is that doesn't make the problem go away. They will always find some place in which they can talk, and they will find like-minded people who will gravitate to them. And that's exactly what happened with Nick Fuentes. He was able still to rock out on places like Rumble, um, and even though he was banned on places like TikTok and YouTube, other content creators would still um, clip stuff that he said and share it, or they would invite him onto their streams or their podcasts and still give him room to speak. The best way to deal with people, whether they are far right nationalists or black pill or in, in the black pill space, or they're grifters, and usually these people are usually a combination of the three. But the way to deal with them is not to deplatform them and cancel them. That doesn't work. Cancel is just what women do. Cancel culture came out of anti. It's let's I'm gonna be blunt. Like cancel culture comes out of antisocial feminine behavior. This is what women do to other women when they don't like dealing with them. They cancel them. If you watch Mean Girls, that's what that is about. That's what that's what Mean Girls do. They cancel each other, right? But that doesn't work amongst men and within a mixed society. Um, the best way to deal with bad or dangerous ideas, is not to make them verboten, right? Not to suddenly give them this aura of magical value where like they cannot be spoken, like saying Voldemort, he he whose name shall not be spoken. You don't do that with people. You don't make what they say verboten. You don't make it quasi magical, the bad things that they say or their names themselves, so that they become like Voldemort on Harry Potter. Instead, you debate them, and you show through debate, through reason, through rhetorical tools, you show how you show how empty what they're saying actually is. That's what you do. You don't try to ban them. You don't try to cancel them. You show how vacuous their arguments actually are when you stand them up to reason. But when you try to deplatform them or cancel them, all you do is make them a martyr amongst people who already hold similar grievances. And then they grow. That's what they did with the Nazis in Germany. didn't work. So um, thanks for showing Safe Studio. Real CP says many able-bodied women refuse to work and just want food stamps. Also, kids are being used as pawns. Absolutely. When you say kids are used as pawns, that's exactly what I meant when I was saying this is emotional. This is what people say when they're saying this is emotional manipulation. Like, oh, what about the kids? What about the kids? That's emotional manipulation. I grant that, but at the same time, people will actually starve because, like I said, the average welfare recipient is someone who's elderly and disabled. It's not one of these fat women with multiple kids. Although, yes, we do want to cut them off. But at the same time, we don't want kids to starve because if kids do actually starve, then that will make the situation more dire and you will see an uptick of the looting and stuff like that, as I was already pointing to. And let me, before I go, actually bring up a actual like genuine case just so people don't think I'm making this stuff up. I do want to kind of back this up a little bit. Give me a second as I pull this up. Pause. Art says I have 4 kids of my own. I have to feed. I don't need to feed everyone else's too. Oh, absolutely, bro. No, you and I think we agree mostly. What what I was just saying is I don't think we should cut off all social welfare programs whatsoever because yes, even though it would lead to more efficiency in the market, um, as I read in my microecon textbook long time ago, you know, we can do with a little inefficiency in the market, and a little less growth by having social welfare. And like I said, there's two arguments to be given to maintain to both have and maintain social welfare programs in society. One is again the moral argument, which is simply that it's morally impermissible to allow a significant chunk of society to go without food and housing because it's not something this is not something that you can practice universally without there being dire consequences to it, which leads into the pragmatic reason why against eradicating all social welfare programs, which is also that a society cannot maintain like you cannot maintain a coharmonious society where most of the people in the country are have-nots, where every where there's a small majority who have everything. That was feudalism, and that sort of society led to endless wars. We don't we don't want that in the contemporary world, right? But yeah, as I'm pulling up information, it's like, yeah, concerns about looting have arisen among SNAP recipients and rumors of potential benefit cuts. TikTok has seen viral videos where users threaten to loot grocery stores if their benefits are not restored, reflecting the frustration of millions relying on these funds. Remember, there's 40 million people relying on these funds. 40 million. That's a lot of people. That is more people than make up some countries. Okay. Now, again, I do want to acknowledge that 2 federal judges have recently injunct, you know, ruled that the Trump administration must use emergency funds to keep the SNAP um, benefits afloat. And here in Maryland, the governor recently released emergency funds through the state to keep SNAP benefits going as well. Now, even though both the federal judges ordered Trump administration, and he said on Truth Social that he is happy to comply with that order, and also here in Maryland, the state of Maryland, the governor has injuncted that they will use emergency funds to keep SNAP afloat for for the month of November. There is still going to be a delay, right? Because if you were supposed to get it on the first or the second or the third, which is today or was today, now it's the fourth, um, you probably didn't receive it. There's going to be a delay. So, but apparently people will still get it this month, which is good news. Because again, as much as I hate, like R said, people being fed off of my tax paying dollars, also I realize we can't allow people to starve. If not for the moral reasons, for the pragmatic reasons. Like I said, the moral reason is not going to appeal to everyone, and I get that. I get that. But the pragmatic reason should, because in the long term it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable to withdraw all these SNAP social welfare benefits like SNAP, WIC, temporary cash assistance, Section 8, and other those other programs out there. And like I said, there's 40 million people on SNAP. Remember, a lot of these people are elderly and disabled. Many of them are veterans. So keep that in mind. There's not just fat women with multiple children by multiple baby daddies that's on welfare. It's also a lot of elderly and disabled people. A lot of people's aunties are on it. A lot of people's grandfathers who fought in like the Korean War, in Vietnam War, in the Persian Gulf War. These folks are also recipients. Let's keep that in mind. Some of them lost appendages in the war, so they can't work. Or if they do work, they work minimum wage jobs like as greeters or as cashiers at Walmart or Target or something because they don't have the mobility. They're not fully able people. So I want to keep that in mind. Again, I get it. You want your money for you. Absolutely. We don't want a state of we don't want the whole country to be like New York City if Mondani gets elected, where where we're going to have state run grocery stores and free housing and all this other sort of stuff because that all comes from the taxpayer. However, we can still deal with a little bit of social welfare for the general benefit of society. There has to be there has to be a middle ground in that scenario. Uh, Ours welfare queen just meant generationally on welfare. Uh, no, welfare queen was a specific concept Ronald Reagan ran on back in the the mid '80s to paint the portrayal of poor people, particularly poor black women that that were living off living off of the taxpayers' dime, eating steak and lobster on food stamps. And they remember even in the '90s, like Bill Clinton fell into that whole trope about the welfare queen, and he instituted welfare reform, which most people applauded, um, particularly on the right at the time. Some people on the left were left miffed about it, but again, I want to point out to black people who are miffed about that welfare didn't help us either. Like it seemed like it was helping us, but it destroyed wealth. Like a lot of people have pointed out in both the pro black spaces in 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 the black manosphere and people like Malcolm X himself said he said himself, welfare destroyed his family. But it wasn't just his family. Welfare was destroying the black community way back then. So it didn't help us either. And it doesn't help when you get, just for economic reasons, which I'm not going to go into here, just for economic reasons, when you give out a bunch of free money to people, it doesn't help them. Like temporarily, yes, but when you have them like um, just when you make them dependent on that government assistance, it doesn't help them in the long term. And then often it comes with strings attached, and that's what happened back then, which destroyed black families. One of the biggest things they did to destroy the black family, one of the strings attached, was not having a black man in the house. Another string attached, which kept people generationally poor within the black community, is that they can only make a certain amount to be on it. And why that's not necessarily bad, but also bad is this. What, because it should have fluctuated with the pop, like when they change how much it is to be above or below the poverty line, it doesn't always reflect relative poverty, right? So this is why, like I said, probability and statistics is important, because where they adjust what the poverty line is for the medium household or whatever, or usually it may not even be adjusted for the actual like median household income. It may just be adjusted. It might just be arbitrarily adjusted by the current administration running the federal government. And the problem with that is that where they arbitrarily set the poverty line may not reflect actual poverty. So I want to go too much in that, but yeah. Um, but yeah, as we see, like, here's another thing: TikTok mobilizes mass looting, threats of SNAP benefits vanish November 1st. It says a wave of, and this comes out of MSN, guys, a wave of um, a wave of looting threats has erupted across social media as millions of Americans brace for an unprecedented halt in food assistance. On TikTok, Facebook, and other platforms, users have posted videos threatening to steal groceries if SNAP benefits vanish November 1st, prompting law enforcement agencies to increase patrols around Walmart and other retailers. By November 1st, 42 million people may lose access to SNAP benefits, a crisis without precedent by the nation's 60-year-old hunger safety net. That's crazy. That's why I was saying a few days ago, guys, if you don't have EDC tools, you need to buy EDC tools and you need to stay fit. We don't know if and when this government shutdown, this fake shutdown will end. It's already about to go beyond the longest lasting shutdown, which ended in 2019, which lasted 35 days. This one is going to go longer than that, unfortunately. And as so, we're going to see social media showing us looting going on. So be careful when you go out shopping, guys. Like, look, if you can, have your have your groceries delivered. Um, I sometimes do that through Amazon Fresh. Uh, but be careful when you go out there, because there are people now who are going to be targeting shoppers. Like if they see you coming out of the markets with a bag full of groceries, you may be a target. If you are comfortable and you have the legal standing to do so, get your concealed carry. If you're not comfortable with that, at least have other EDC tools. You can get a pepper spray gun if you want something that's not lethal but will draw the same attention as a firearm. You can like one of the big pepper spray guns out there is called the burner, BYRNA, not to be confused with a burner gun, which is an illegal gun. No, burner BYRNA is a pepper spray uh, pellet gun. It's very effective, and they look like real firearms, and they cost a fraction less than actual firearms. Or like I said, you can get tactical flashlight, tactical pen. Um, you can get one of those um, flashbang flashlights, which it looks sort of like a looks sort of like a baton, but it's a flashlight, so it can be used as a blunt striking object, and it is legal. But check your local state and city to make sure. But tactical pens and tactical flashlights are legal everywhere. I can even carry a tactical flashlight in Japan of all places. Probably Singapore as well. Singapore is the most strict place I know, but um, yeah. Um, Getting back to the country, make sure you have EDC tools on you. Make sure if you can to go shopping in the daylight. If women, if you need, go with other people when you go shopping. I know it's only two people currently on here, but this is also for people watching this on replay, guys. So that's why I'm talking generally. I don't want you to be like, who's he talking to? Like, I also when I'm talking to you guys, I'm also saying stuff for people who will be watching this stream on replay, as as a video. But yeah, um, yeah, EDC tools, man. A tactical flashlight, tactical pen, pepper spray, or pepper spray pellet gun, or firearm if you're legally able to carry one and you're comfortable carrying one. And then if you do get one, also go to the range and practice. Do that. And you can also buy a kit for your firearm to do dry fire shooting, practice dry fire shooting. So you can get it because let's face it, going to the range can get expensive, right? Not going to the range itself, but all the ammo that you use at the range can get very expensive. So to be able to still get in those reps where you can practice withdrawing your gun and doing it through like different scenarios, you should get one of those little dry fire kits for your gun that you can practice dry firing. Plus, also, since most people go to a range, which is like a, a a uh, a range within a building and not an open range. Like if you're lucky if you can go to a open a open air range, but most people go to like an inside range. And so if you're in the inside range, most likely the folks in there are not going to allow you to practice drawing, drawing out your holster and shooting. Like they don't allow you to just keep doing that or whatever. So to get that practice, that reflex of pulling your weapon and shooting, you should get one of those little dry fire kits. Anyway, off of that, or since there are people of all races like that, he's referring to welfare queen. Yeah, absolutely. But like I said, when with the image people conjure usually is of a big black woman. And like I said, I'm not mad at it because there's too many big black women who are overrepresented as as SNAP recipients. So you can't stereotypes. Stereotypes are just over are are just over overextended facts. Like a stereotype is something that's true of several people within a group that's then hyperextended to everyone within that group. But obviously it fits some of those people. And that's the case with the welfare queen concept. But yeah. He said I'm called far right a lot, and I think you and I might actually agree on more than we disagree. Yeah, I've already told you. I think we agree more than we disagree. As far as far right, again, people will use the term far right to slander people because look, racist has become an empty term nowadays. Like people use racist so much that it's losing it's lost its stigma. The same thing is starting to happen with the term fascist. The term fascist has been misused so much that it's losing its stigma, and that's bad because the terms racism or the terms like racist and misogynist, um, and fascist, these are terms with with um with extensions to them sh- that need to be held in place. Like the intentions may change, but the extension of those terms don't. And it is the extensions of those terms, the extensional meaning that is why we use them in the first place. But when people change the intentional meaning so much so that doesn't even it doesn't even correspond with the extensional meaning, it it it, it makes it makes those terms functionally useless, right? Like calling everything like now it's like people because the left has been so radicalized. I used to be a leftist person, but I was someone who was like a staunch liberal of 1995 because because the left, including the liberal base, has moved so far to the left. What was now considered a liberal from, like I say, 1995 is now a moderate or even a conservative. Even though I don't consider myself a conservative, I consider myself a classical liberal. Um, but to many liberals today, as well as progressives, I'm considered a conservative, even though I literally took a progressive. Uh, literally took a progressive um, survey 3 years ago, and I was like over like 95% in agreement with that stuff. But because they subject everyone in their groups to a litmus test, if you if like if you fail on any given measure of that litmus test, then you're automatically not one of them. um, and many of us are going to be, conservative on some issues, but or we're just not going to, like in my case, I'm just not going to agree with something that goes against either reason or science, regardless of where it is politically. And the term fascist has become useless because eh, that like there were presidents who were clearly more aligned with what you might call fascism than Trump was. I mean, but most of these people who are the most politically active, tend to be the most retarded on U.S. history. People like Woodrow Wilson might be considered more fascist, or Dwight Eisenhower, Andrew Johnson, or maybe even freaking the most beloved president of all, Abraham Lincoln. He's he uh he took away the writ of habeas corpus during the Civil War and locked people up for talking against the Civil War. He took away the writ of habeas corpus. People were fine with that. People love FDR. He got elected 4 goddamn times. They start calling him King FDR out of both mockery, partly out of mockery and some out of respect. Start calling him King FDR, a guy who threw an entire race of people in internment camps for no for no fault of their own other than we were at war with the people in their country. Threw all those Japanese Americans in internment camps and anyone who looked Japanese, because we know that a lot of white people cannot tell Asians apart. So if you looked at Japanese, you were also thrown in those internment camps. George Takei, one of the original Star Trek actors, was someone who lived in one of those internment camps. But we want to call Trump a fascist. And it's become the playbook of Democrats over the past 40 plus years to label any conservative Republican as a fascist, and it just does it just rings hollow now. Like ever since Reagan, they that was the playbook to call conservative Republicans fascists. They used it of George Bush, then his son George W. Bush. They were so much so that when George W. Bush was in office, and by the way, he was patently worse than Trump. George W. Bush was patently worse than Trump. A lot of the things that we hate came out of his era. The Patriot Act was him. And what happened? Obama, Biden, they still signed off on keeping the Patriot, keeping many of the parts of the Patriot Act alive, because the Patriot Act has to keep being. I think every presidential term they have to sign off on many of the aspects of the Patriot Act to keep going, and they signed off on them. But yeah, Bush was so evil, right? But like I said, you can disagree with Bush wholeheartedly, but to try to say that his grandfather, worked with the Nazis in Germany, like that's just crazy. Because that's how they tried to smear him back then. Like I said, it's always been a common tactic for the past 40 years to smear every conservative Republican as being either fascist or aligned with Hitler in some way. And it just rings hollow. But like I said, most of the stuff we hate about Republicans today come out of the the Bush era of the 2000s. The Patriot Act, Department of Homeland Security was came out of the Patriot Act. ICE was formed out of the Department of Homeland Security also through the Patriot Act. ICE and Department of Homeland Security came out of the Patriot Act. A whole new intelligence agency that reports directly and only to the president out of the Patriot Act. Like, but so if you're gonna be mad and calling someone fascist, yeah, I get calling Bush that of all people, the son, not the father. But it's just overused, and calling people far right just because they're conservative is just dubious. And I can see R's frustration with that, because he's more than I'm guessing more than likely he's just I could be wrong, but R I'm sure you probably just a run of the mill conservative. Not and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean a run of the mill conservative in the sense that you're probably just a paleo conservative, but to millennials and Gen Z who are so far left of us, to you, there to to excuse me, to them you are far right, and even I, who am or consider myself a classical liberal, even to them I'm a conservative because I believe people with dicks are men. Sue me. Art says I make more than anyone I know. I own an excavation company. I just took a 700,000 loan for a piece of machinery today. I was able to do that because I sacrificed and worked harder than them. You don't have to tax me to feed the hungry. Yeah, I mean, I get that, but we have to look. Um, so we should tax everyone, not just you. But also, I agree that you should not penalize people for the success, and that's where I think your frustration comes from. Is that people like Mondani says we need to tax higher the the people who are wealthy, and that doesn't work. For one, the super wealthy don't show their wealth in their income. Like, so raising, taxes on the wealthy isn't going to work because they don't show their wealth through their income. The only way you could go after them is like if you, I guess, raise like the capital gains tax or whatever. And there's still loopholes for that for the super wealthy to get around. What it's going to do is punish people who are just high income people. And what is that going to do? That's going to either force them to, well, it's going to cause different things. One, they'll go to states where those income taxes are lower. Two, they may decide to migrate out of the country, as we've seen a lot of them do. I've even seen some wealthy folks actually renouncing their American citizenship just so they can avoid paying taxes. Now, that is not something a lot of super wealthy people do, but there are Americans who do that. There are very wealthy Americans out there who have renounced their American citizenship just to get out of paying taxes. Now, that is that's a small minority of wealthy people, though. Then the other thing is it's going to disincentivize people from making a high income in the first place. So I get that you should not penalize people with higher taxes because they are successful. However, we still all have to pay taxes. That's just that. For even even if it wasn't for social welfare, we still all have to pay taxes for basic things that we need the government to do, which is defense, right? Defense, law enforcement, and to keep our countries and to keep our keep our government running. So those three things will still need to be in place. Even if we got rid of everything else, they will still need to collect taxes, you know, um, for national defense, for law enforcement, and for the to keep the government going. So Agus says, I felt a sense of sadness as I was going through JFK Airport on my way to Florida to see how hard these TSA officers working, not knowing when they'll be getting a paycheck. Man, watch TSA gonna go off. Do you remember the what was that, like 8 years ago when, yeah, remember the last time when the shutdown went down and people was making fun of how TSA was like, man, they didn't give a shit, like they was blasting. Do you remember this, Agatha? I don't know if you was working in the government at the time or whatever, but do you remember how at a few airports, I don't think it was JFK, it might have been JFK or it might have been what's the other one besides JFK? The one coming out of Jersey. But anyway, then it was like BWI and Washington Dulles. They were talking about in the O'Hare, a lot of these big airports. They were saying the TSA did not give a flying freak. Like they were blasting like gangster rap music over the intercoms. And I thought it was a joke, but then what they actually showed on the news, one place, I forgot what they was playing. I think they was playing like, "I want you be mine again, baby." Uh. I was like, wait, what? The TSA did not give a F. You know, it's gonna be like that again at the airports. TSA are not gonna give a F. They're gonna be like, man. I don't care. Just go through. Just go through. I don't care. And then I mean, and then look, I'm not scared about TS. I'm not worried about TSA. I mean, I want them to get paid, sure, but I'm not worried about them. I'm worried about air traffic controllers not getting paid. Air traffic controllers handle a lot of stress, and man, you better pay them folks. Do you really want air traffic controllers going without being paid? Do you want to be in the air with air traffic controllers not getting paid? I don't. I don't want to be. I want to be in the air with air traffic controllers not getting paid. That's what I'm worrying about. Air traffic controllers not getting paid. TSA is going to be fine because, I, frankly, I'm not trying to be mean. TSA is a useless job. It is like it's just security theater. Like they don't really do anything to prevent anything. It's just all it does is take up people's time going through customs, like making people take off their shoes and shit and pour out their water. And the only thing useful is that making sure people don't take their goddamn lithium ion battery and store it in, you know, where the damn thing could catch fire. But what anyway? R says those people knew that risk when they took that job, kind of like a cop or someone in the military know they might die. I get that isn't the first shutdown in history. Well, I'm gonna disagree with you there. Like, I don't think no. Look, you can go into a job like the military or law enforcement or firefighting with the knowledge that you may die in the line of duty. But no one takes a job, whether in the private sector or the public sector, with the expectation that they may not get paid for that job because that goes against the very reason for working a job in the first place. Because if you can say that about someone working in in the government in the public sector, people can say the same thing about the private sector. They're not going to be look they're going to be just as they're going to be just as flippant towards you as well. They'd be like, well, you knew the risk when you became an entrepreneur. You knew that that by virtue of being an entrepreneur, it is high risk, and that most entrepreneurs fail. So you should have knew that risk before undergoing becoming an entrepreneur. Is that's the sort of the same rationale. So I think it would be very dismissive for you to say that of people working government jobs because regardless of the regardless of the job, if it's an honest job, everyone should go into the job expecting that they should get paid for that very work. Unless and only unless you are in a performance based job where it's all commission and performance based. I've worked those sort of jobs. In that scenario, you know that you may not get paid. However, usually performance based jobs pay a lot because they know that there is a time where you may not get paid, so you need to make a lot when you are getting paid to cover those times when you aren't getting paid. So that that is the only exception to when where you should have the expectation that sometimes you may not get paid is when you are performing a performance based only, like, um high, hard sales type job. Other than that, wherever it's irrelevant. I think wherever you work in a public space or wherever you work in a public sector or the private sector, that you should not expect to get paid. You should, if you are working a job, by very definition of it being a job, you should have the expectation that you will be paid for it. I think it's unreasonable to say just because they work for the government that they should have the assumption that they may not get paid, because you can say that literally, because like I said, you can say that literally of any job industry. You can always say, well, there's shutdowns in the government, so it happened before, it's going to happen again. You can also say, yeah, but in the private sector, you know that there's going to be there's going to be downsizing in the private sector all the time. So you should expect at some point that you might be downsized yourself. You see what I'm saying? That can cut both ways. Um, Art says, I don't trust the government enough to be in charge of it. Nobody knows what the local community better than the locals' help should come from home. I mean, yeah, that's why you have the federal, state, and the local. The federal subsidizes many of their programs to the state, to which they divvy out funds for programs, which may also trickle down to the local government level as well. So, all right, says Nick Fuentes is a moron. Destiny. He's a nasty work. Yeah. I'm about to go, guys. I'm not probably not gonna get through all of these comments. I'm gonna try to go through a few more, and I'm not gonna repeat that Gregory. Take that Gen Z shit somewhere else. Matter of fact, go to bed. Go to get a job. Anyway, I still like this guy. I'm pretty conservative, but we actually agree on a lot. Just disagree on how it should get accomplished. Yeah, I think that's fair. I think I think that's a fair assessment of between our differences, but our agreements as well. CP says the best believe you cannot talk about Jewish with free speech. No, I mean, if you're talking about criticism, yeah. So there are some folks who think any criticism is anti-Semitic, and those folks are just being disingenuous. No one is above criticism, but there is a there can sometimes be a fine line between criticism and insults, right? But most of us can recognize genuine criticism from genuine mockery and insult. When you pretend there isn't one, then you're being disingenuous. Not you, I'm saying, but people who think that sort of way. Ours is a lot of protected statues. Yeah. CP says the thing we minimize are Hispanic, LULAC, Raza types. I don't know what LULAC is. I've heard it before. I can't remember. He says most black folks are not pro blacks, most are pro multiculturalism. I guess it's today is voting day in New York City, so had to go vote before going to work. I think Madani's gonna win, and well, you New Yorkers have fun with paying those high taxes for government run uh, supermarkets, which is not a good idea because it's been tried before, and uh, let's just say it's not the best. He wants to have a government funded supermarket in each borough of New York for you people not affiliated with the East Coast or with New York in general. There's five boroughs of New York, um, right? So Brooklyn, Queens, Bronx, Manhattan, Staten Island, and he wants to put a government run supermarket in each one of them. That's going to and he wants to have free housing for folks, um and some other things that I think are just very radical. And I'm glad I'm glad I didn't decide to move to New York 13 years ago. I probably would have had fun though. My sisters were living there for a while. Well, two of my five sisters were living there. But I wouldn't want to have encroached on their life. I'm pretty sure they didn't want me to. We're not close, so I'm pretty sure they wouldn't want me to. We're half siblings, so we're not close. So I'm pretty sure they wouldn't want me, you know, bothering them. Not, which I wouldn't. They lived in Brooklyn. As one of them went to St. John's University. The other one went to my alma mater at University of Maryland, but moved up there and they lived together. So, and I think she moved back there a few years ago, whereas the younger one stayed here after she got married. I don't think the other one is ever going to get married for reasons I won't go into. Let's just say she's the strong, independent woman type. Don't need no man who's and it's all you know the opposite of me and my father. My father's way more conservative. But anyway, R says I don't buy into the feudalism argument. Upward financial mobility in the United States is easier than any time anywhere in history. Yes and no. Again, there is income inequality, and mind you, the whole thing about the cognitive elite did not was not an idea that came out of the liberal left. This came from a conservative and a libertarian who you may be familiar with, who wrote the Bell Curve, Charles F. Murray and Richard Herrnstein. I think Richard Herrnstein passed away like a decade or so ago. Charles Murray's still around. They both wrote, and it came to be true that there was going to be a rise of the cognitive elite, which meant there was going to be a rise of people in the tech space and who are highly educated, who were going to be the highest income earners in the country, and they want to start to merge with the wealthy elite, causing even more income inequality, which meant would left would have left the onus on the government to provide and maintain social welfare programs for people who are of less cognitive ability, because now it's going to be that the people at the bottom rungs of society aren't merely people who were born into poverty. That's going to be part of it, but not just people who are born into poverty um, or there because they're in a they're they come from a suppressed minority group or whatever, an oppressed minority group, but rather they're going to be there because they are of less cognitive. They are there because they are of less cognitive ability and talent, and most of these high-paying jobs are going to go to the people who are of higher cognitive ability who can fulfill those spaces in the tech arena, whether you're talking about engineers, um, computer programmers, data scientists, um, and other sorts of folks. So, and this has come to be, and in that case, yes, there has been a sort of corporate feudalism going on. I think that I think corporate feudalism is a bit of it is a bit of an exaggeration. What I was saying is that if you completely cut off social welfare in this current state that we are in the 21st century, where there is a cognitive elite which is merging with the wealthy elite, right, is that the people left at the bottom are just going to be people left there because they are of less cognitive ability. To put it bluntly, people who are dumber, people who are dumber and less educated are going to be left at the bottom. And we can't just have millions of people just starving to death, because again, that will be like the new that would be a neo feudalism. I'm sorry, I'm throwing around terms. I know this sounds like I sound like the typical college educated schmuck using big words. I try not to throw around big words just to try to sound impressive, but if the word fits, then I'm just going to use it. But yeah, that would be neo feudalism, where if we have a we have this we have the one percenters, and people always talk about the one percenters. People don't need to worry about the one percenters. You really need to be worrying about the the 0.01%. Those are the people who hold most of the world's income and most of the world's resources. The 0.01%, not the one percenters. People all know about the one percenters. And depending on in what state you live in, someone who's in the 1% nowadays is probably making like over 120,000 a year. They are already the 1% relative to that state, right? You don't need to worry about them. You need to worry about the 0.01%. This okay. They hold most of the world's resources. And like I said, if you cut off the lower working class from all resources, since the bulk of it would be held by the elite, and don't give them any social welfare programs, then yeah, that will be a neo feudalism. It's not merely this is not an emotional argument that I'm giving. I'm talking I'm speaking of I'm just giving I'm just drawing inferences. I'm not trying to I'm not trying to use any emotional appeal here. And like I said, it the reason you don't want a neo feudalism, I gave two reasons. One is the moral position is that it would just be morally impermissible to allow millions of people to go without food and housing just because they happen to be born with lower cognitive ability and talent. Because when you have an elite that's mainly made up of the cognitive elite as we have today, who are all the highest, the biggest, the wealthiest people. These are all people in the tech space: Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett. Um, what's the Lex Luthor guy of Amazon? That him. Like these are all techie dudes, right? And that's increasingly the case that the cognitive elite is merging with the wealthy elite. So the people who will be left without are going to be the people who are just people born with less cognitive ability, because whether people want to admit it or not, cognitive ability is mostly hereditary. It is mostly hereditary. I uh, General intelligence as measured by IQ is over 50% hereditary, but as you age, it goes up to 80%. 80%. And what isn't hereditary is called is made up, it can loosely be said is environmental factors. But when you talk about environmental factors, the part that is made up of your childhood upbringing only comes up to about, and I'm being generous when I say this, about 4%. So what is all that other part? So if say 51% is, so if we're saying like about 51% is hereditary and about 4% is your childhood upbringing, that's like 55%. What about the other 45%? Well, boys and girls, I hate to tell you this, but the rest of that is mainly a matter of luck. And like I said, that goes down as you get older, where heredity counts for 80% of IQ. So, meaning that most people are going to be left out of the cognitive elite just through factors that they have absolutely no control over. And it would be morally impermissible to allow people to just starve and go unhoused and die just because they were born with less intellectual capacities as other people. Then, like I said, not everyone is going to be moved by the moral position. I get that. The other matter is the pragmatic position. And again, this goes back to the neo feudalism. You cannot have a stable society where most of people are the have nots. And you might believe that, okay, well, this argument doesn't really you know, cut the chase. But Karl Marx has quite clearly, and he's not the only one, so did Adam. I was about to say Adam West. This is why it's late, and I need to get off this live stream. I was about to say Adam West, but Adam, whatever his name, who wrote The Wealth of Nations. So if Karl Marx is like like the father of communism, socialism, then Adam, whatever his name, is the who wrote The Wealth of Nations is like sort of the backbone of capitalism. Both of them identify a class struggle. It's just they go about it in different ways, and what they start off from the same. So they start they both start from the same basic state of affairs, and then they work their way through their arguments to different conclusions. I think Adam was much more realistic than Marx. Um, Either way, there is a history of class struggle, and to ignore that because it's inconvenient for us doesn't is irrelevant. Like if if we have a cognitive elite with coupled with extreme income inequality, and we would cut off every social welfare program for the sake of efficiency of the market, it will lead to a neo feudalism. And I said eventually the have nots will not put up with it. And that is the history of class struggle, that the have nots have always uprooted the the elite when they've taken to the extreme of just outright denying those people their basic needs. If people's basic needs aren't met, they will find a way to to go after them. So, and again, I'm talking in the extreme here. Like this won't be in the immediate, but in the immediate right now, we just see how people are already threatening to do mass lootings with SNAP benefits being cut off. And like I said, I get that in some regards. However, I have no remorse for the people looting because obviously the people who are looting are able-bodied people. If you can loot, you can work. Also, if you can loot, you you should be in the military. If you're an able-bodied person who can break into stores and steal and run away with those goods, that is that is someone who can be in the military. Shout out to the U.S. Marines who will be turning 250th on November 10th. I wrongly said that they already had their birthday in my YouTube short, but they actually had their birthday November 10th, which is the day right before Veterans Day, which is November 11th. So sorry for that error for people who watch that YouTube short. So if you can loot and run away with goods, go to the Marines. Why? So I agree. So I have no remorse for them because the people who actually are going to be suffering when benefits are cut off again are the elderly and disabled. And I can say, and it's easy to say, well, I don't care about those folks. But I'm not talking about the emotional manipulation of people who go online saying, what are we going to do? Because, like I said, if you are someone who are able to get online and complain, you are someone who could go online and work. So I completely get that. However, the people who are not going online and complaining are the ones who are actually silently suffering. Those are the elderly and disabled, not to mention young children. No one wants, I don't, I, I, again, this is why I'm apathetic about politics. I don't care what your politics are. I don't want to see kids starving. I don't care whose kids they are. I don't want to see their kids starving. Kids are not at fault for the what adults do. I don't want to see them starving. I don't care what the adults did. Now, what is the case is that if these people are unable to provide for their children, they need their children taken away from them because these people should not be having children if they cannot provide for them, which goes into that foresight of knowing that you are not in a financial position to have children in the first place, which, like I said, leads to me thinking that eugenics wasn't a bad idea, as I stated 2 hours ago. And I'm about to get off of this. Ours, instead of giving these people welfare, we should be giving them financial education. So I'm glad you mentioned that because I actually looked into that myself a bit, not a lot. I need to look more into it. But when you look at behavioral research, they did actually look at that. So they looked at different ideas of that of giving people financial literacy, um, or giving them certain social welfare benefits. Um, but what it came out to be, again, this is why sometimes the findings we reach in behavioral and social research are often counterintuitive. Is that people did the best when they got direct cash trans when they were given direct cash transference. So when you give, basically is which actually makes sense if you look at it, is that poor people know what they need, uh I mean, if you give them money, they know what they need to get with it. So instead of financial literacy, instead of these social welfare programs like WIC and SNAP and TCA and Section 8 and all that sort of stuff, just give them direct cash and they'll buy what they actually need. So the people who need food will buy food. The people who need medicine will get medicine. The people who need money for transportation will get transportation. The people who need to pay bills will pay their bills. The people who need to find adequate housing will find adequate housing, although that also builds on the need for building more houses instead of letting boomers, and no offense to any of you if you're a boomer, but instead of letting boomers put all these zoning and housing restrictions up to keep the values of their homes high, while denying young people the ability to buy their first homes like they were able to do 50 years ago. And then these same boomers will complain, well, why aren't you people buying houses like we did? All you guys want to do is eat eat what they always say to millennials and Gen Z would eat uh, um, sandwiches with what's that green with guacamole? What's the guac sandwich? The guacamole sandwiches or whatever they used to say. And I'm like, do y'all know how stupid that sounds? Like saying, do you really think people went without buying a home just to pay extra money in coffee and designer sandwiches? Really? Like that sounds so stupid and dismissive. Like, and they really bought their own shit. Like, shut up. Like, you lived in a period where college was either free or it was cheap as hell. You only All you needed to do was qualify to get into college at the time, and you paid. College was free for up until for many places up until like the 70s, and like in the state of California, it was like free. And then even where it wasn't free, then it was still very low. You could pay for a year of college working the summer at Sears, right? um, Housing was cheap. And they was like, yeah, the housing was cheap, but these were very small houses. So what? It was still a house. I'm sorry, I hate boomers. But anyway, off of that, I gotta go. But yeah, to summarize everything I was saying, there's threats of mass looting going on since the SNAP benefits were cut off. However, there's been two federal judges to rule that Trump has to use emergency federal funding to subsidize uh, the SNAP program to keep going right now. And he said he's willing to comply on Truth Social. Um, and in the state of Maryland, where I live, the governor also released emergency funds to keep the SNAP benefit running for recipients here in the state of Maryland. Until then, there's still going to be a delay. And because of that, people are threatening to loot. However, again, many people who are looting are able bodied people, and we should not give a shit about them. except that you need to take extra precautions when you go out shopping, that people aren't trying to size you up and steal your food and groceries. Um, get a concealed carry if you're legally able to do so and you're comfortable carrying one. If not, you still need to get some sort of EDC tools to protect yourself on your day to day, like a tac flashlight or a tac pen, um, or pepper spray or a pepper spray pellet gun, something of the like. Um, and this whole issue with the SNAP brings up the whole trope of the welfare queen brought up during the Reagan administration of the 80s to villainize poor black women. And again, welfare was not a friend to the black community because it destroyed many communities in the past. I mean, destroyed many families in the black community in the past, including people like Malcolm X. He said it destroyed his family, leaving his mom in a mental institution, he in an orphanage, with all he and his siblings separated until adulthood. um, and it continued to destroy the black community, um, because you couldn't have welfare with a man in the house. So women, black women, chose welfare programs over men, and that destroyed the black families, which destroyed the black community. So when welfare reform came along in the 90s because of Bill Clinton, most of us welcomed it and wished they were in welfare outrightly. Um, however, however, I do think there still needs to be social welfare programs right now, because currently we live in a time where there's a cognitive elite, and the cognitive elite are basically people of higher cognitive ability or of other sorts of talents that allow them to earn high incomes. And these cognitive elite or talented folks are merging with the wealthy elite, meaning that many of the people who are going to be left at the bottom, of society, so in a socioeconomic status, will be people of lower cognitive ability and talents, people who are basically untalented and kind of stupid, because cognitive ability is mostly hereditary. It would be immoral to allow them to suffer and starve just because they were simply born without less abilities and talent. Also, even if that doesn't appeal to you, that moral position, it's also pragmatic that we don't allow that to happen, because it will lead to an unstable society, because you can't have a bunch of have-nots going without, going for so long without there being repercussions. And we can look into the history of class struggle to 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 confirm that point. um but again, this falls on deaf ears when you see these people getting online talking about they're going to go loot, or complaining that they don't want to work but they still want to receive their SNAP benefits. These people are able bodied and should be working, and I have no problem with them being cut off. But children shouldn't starve regardless. And it's, we should also remember that despite the back and forth going on, yes, there are more yes, there are more white people on welfare than black people. However, black people are overrepresented in these programs because per capita they make up more people using up the programs. Regardless of which race is using up these programs, the bulk of these people who are on these programs are not able bodied, actually, but elderly and disabled. Many of them are also disabled veterans. So we need to keep that in mind too. I don't care what you think, but starving children and disabled veterans get fed, period. So that's that's where I'm going to leave that. um, all right, says you can leave generational wealth for 200 per month life insurance policy. You just have to sacrifice DoorDash and nails and lashes. Again, I get that because I make those jokes too, but it's very dismissive and it's just not true. Um, first, people misuse the term generational wealth. Generational wealth is basically made up of property ownership. A lot of black people were left out of generational wealth back during the early part of the 20th century because of because of redlining. Redlining prevented a lot of those people from building generational wealth. Um, and everyone likes to misuse those terms like generational wealth and uh, multiple streams of income and this and passive income and all that sort of stuff. Passive income is just basically real estate or investment, or investing in different sorts of securities, um, or investing either investing in real estate or investing in securities. That's passive income. But people misuse the term passive income to talk about holding down a secondary job. So multiple streams of income. Again, if you have a good enough job, you don't need multiple streams of income. And if you work in certain sectors, you can't have multiple streams of income anyway, because it become that becomes a that can become an issue. Like, say, if you work in the government and you have a high level security clearance, you can't have multiple streams of income because you're gonna have to clear it through that first for to keep your maintain your clearance. Um, and generational wealth is mostly a matter of property ownership. You're not building generational wealth just by earning more money. That's not generational wealth. Generational wealth is owning property. So it's not something you're gonna get just because you decide to go without. Going without is just being part of being a responsible person. Yes, you should be going without fast food and nails and lashes as a responsible citizen, someone who cares about having emergency funds and savings. Yes, but that has nothing to do with generational wealth. Generational wealth is property ownership. Um, CP says illegals know we are emotional regarding kids, and that is what they use against us. Well, not me. I know they're attacked as well, just like I did a podcast on sanctuary cities. I didn't catch that yet, but because I think it was still saying up, it was saying, um, it, it was saying that it was still upcoming, the video, when I checked, but it's um, but yeah, I did mean to check that out. But yeah, that goes into emotional manipulation and the whole thing with the DACA and with the birthright citizenship. So I agree with you on that. They can be sent home. This ain't their home. So that's for their country to deal with, not for us. So I don't think that's so. My part. I wasn't talking about illegal immigrants, kids starving. I was saying generally, no kid should go starving. That's No kid should go starving, and no disabled veteran should go starving or unhoused. CP says Snap is close to 20 million kids on it. Yeah, because like I said, most of the people on it are not welfare queens, even though that's the way it's been painted since the 80s. Most people are elderly and disabled or their children. There's a lot, for this to be the wealthiest country in the world, there's a lot of food insecurity in this country. We haven't even talked about the Indian reservations where there's a lot of food insecurity. Like, so yeah. Um, Ours says I have no problem helping the disabled and elderly. I just don't think the government is capable of doing it without the fraud and waste. I believe it should be done in the community. No, I don't believe the community is a better for the reason so similar to the reason why I don't believe in the community health centers. This is why there's so many this is why there's so many homeless people on the streets. Most of the people who are homeless are are mentally ill. That happened because back in the 70s, with with people thinking that psychiatric hospitals were evil and that they just abused their patients, they they disinstitutionalized those mental hospitals, and instead, you know, under um, under Lyndon Johnson, they decided to erect community health centers where people could voluntarily go there to get uh, psychological uh, psychological assistance. The problem is people who are severely mentally ill are not going to seek for help, and many of these people are on the streets, and that's bad because many of them are either a danger to themselves or at risk of being, you know, hurt by other people. And some of them who are mentally unstable may be a threat to others as well. That's why a bulk of these people on the streets were an after effect of the institutionalization of psychiatric hospitals back in the 70s. Um, community Leaving things up to the community level does not work. It has to be done. It has to be done at a higher order by the government, ensuring that the community, like the community, can do stuff like food banks, but that's just not going to take care. If there's currently 42 million receiving SNAP benefits, okay, even if we say 10, let's be nice and say 10 million of them don't deserve to be on those benefits. That's still 32 million people. You, I don't think on the community level you're going to handle that. Besides that, it still has to be subsidized from somewhere. So that's CP says, let's not forget how many illegals not long ago were getting free hotels and being picky on free food, in which they got free food cards. Many got afterwards. Yeah, I know. I don't. I'm not trying to go down the route of talking about illegals because it's gonna lead me astray from the snap. I'm trying, so I think those are two different conversations worth having. um, but yeah, those are two conversations worth having, just not at the same time. Or says, please, if you're able, donate to your church or local food bank. We need to live in a village again and stop depending on the government. I just don't think that's realistic. That's why I'm not a libertarian, because I think and this is where I don't think you're far right, or I think you're more of a libertarian. This is where I disagree with libertarians. This because a lot of people think classical liberals and libertarians are the same thing because we agree on a lot. This is where I disagree with the libertarians. I think the libertarians are unrealistic when they think we could just do away with all government programs except for the assistance of defense and law enforcement. And that's just not it's just not realistic when you're talking about a country the size of 330 something million people and growing. Um, that's no, you cannot do everything on the local level. Is That's just impractical. It, well, no, it's not even impractical. I think it's yeah, it would be genuinely possible, and I'm using possibility only in an epistemic sense here. Um, but I think it's a practical impossibility. I think it's very impractical to think uh, that the govern that a population of our size, not to mention the diversity of our population, can be all managed at the micro level. Is I don't I I don't think that's realistic. CP says 2019, 25% of New York City, the Jewish below the poverty line, are mostly dependent on food stamps, but they get a pass. I don't know the stats on that, so I can't confirm nor deny that. So I don't know. What I can say is, like I said, we know there's not just black people on it, but it's just that black people are overrepresented in those programs. Um, so Honestly, I do look at things that way. I know there was a risk of failing when I started. I thought about that risk when I bought the dozer today. I want more state responsibility and less federal. Then that's the other rub is that both liberals and conservatives will will say they want conservatives say they want states' rights over federal when it serves their purposes, but then switch it up when it's not. And liberals will do the same thing. They'll be for like strong federal government, except when it goes against the stuff that they want, like abortion and all that sort of stuff. And then they'll be like, oh well, it should be states' rights. And so my thing is, like I said, everything can't be handled at the micro level. Some things have to be done at the central level, especially to when it comes to money. Fraud and waste is something that's inescapable for any government. That's not unique to Americans. If anything, I think we always complain about fraud and waste. I've been in third world countries. The level of corruption here is way less than in other countries. Way less compared to places I've been where regardless of what the law is, if you can pay someone off, you can get things done. And I'm talking about the Philippines. I love the Philippines, but the Philippines is rife with corruption. So people always talk about fraud and waste in the government. They all know fraud and waste. They went to somewhere like the Philippines, where the former president Ferdinand Marcos Sr. was a military dictator for about 30 years and is in the Guinness Book of World Records for defrauding a government of the most money ever. He defrauded the Philippine government of literally multiple billions with a B of dollars to which their family has still held on to, even though now his son is currently now the current president in the Philippines. And people are still asking, so what happened to all that money? Did your father defrauded the government? He's like, well, we don't have it anymore, which is a patent lie because they're still one of the wealthiest people in the country. But that's an aside. I don't want to go into a tangent about the Philippines. All of that's to say, when people complain about fraud and waste here, they have no idea how bad it can get. Like fraud and waste is just should be accepted in any aspect for any government. But I think it is not as bad here as it is in other countries, even in other Western countries, because it's easy to compare it to like third world countries or underdeveloped countries. As to say, I don't want to say third world dismissively, but it's easy to dismiss that as, oh, those are just underdeveloped countries. Of course, they're rife with corruption. This happens in other westernized countries too, the UK, France, Germany, all those Scandinavian countries that the leftists love. Like you can't get away from it. You're just gonna have to accept that there's gonna be a bit of fraud and waste in any government. You what what you have to do is reduce the amount that it is, but simply you cutting off you know a leg of government just you know doesn't get rid of it. You just concentrate into other areas, like and or you go to the extreme left and become an anarchist and just say we shouldn't have government. Libertarians are sometimes uh, teetering on the edge of becoming anarchists when they talk about we don't need government because it's unrealistic, and this is why there has been no there has never been a successful government run by a libertarian leader because it's unrealistic. Um, like I said, too many libertarians run the risk of sounding like anarchists. So, but I get it when you say I want more state responsibility and less federal government. He says, how can you say welfare killed the black family and it's bad in one breath and justify welfare continuing next breath because wealth gap and people stupid? Because I do nuance what I said. I and I'm talk what I was talking about is, like I said, I pointed directly to what Malcolm X wrote about in his autobiography, that welfare destroyed his family. And he said if there was, and it's talked about in the movie, if you don't want to read the book, you can watch the Spike Lee movie that came out in 1992. Um, he it described the manipulation the government went, and this was not on the federal level, this was on the state level. So saying that it should be handled at the state instead of the federal, that does not make it any better. A bureaucracy is a bureaucracy. A bureaucracy does not have to be on a federal level to be corrupt or inefficient. A bureaucracy can exist on the state level or the local level. Now, again, unless you become an anarchist and just say we don't need government, then you have to accept that there's going to be bureaucracy at any level of government, whether local, state, or federal. And yes, they destroyed the black, they destroyed his family, and they destroyed multiple black families by one insisting that there not be a black man in the household. That destroyed black families because you can't have a stable household where there's not a where you can't allow a two when you destroy the nuclear family. if if maintaining welfare comes at the cost of having a nuclear family, you're destroying the black family. Not only that, but then you you keep them at a you keep them at a poverty level so that they can keep live, receiving that income. Here's another thing. So I remember a friend of mine, he was working full time. His wife has some sort of disability, but she could still work. But she rather not work so she could claim disability, and convinced him to not make more money so that she could receive her benefits. And I'm like, what the freak? And he went along with it. I mean, unfortunately, but no. Uh, Now, what that doesn't contradict what I said about social welfare programs. When I'm talking about social welfare programs, I'm not just talking about temporary cash assistance and food stamps. When I say social welfare, I'm talking about social welfare for the society at large. I'm not talking about specific programs. Those are two different things I'm talking about. What like well, of course, welfare programs like temporary cash assistance and WIC and SNAP and Section 8 do fall into social welfare, but social welfare is a more general concept. It means that what I was talking about is, in when you're talking about economics, you have if you have to accept that there will introduce some inefficiency in the market and less growth if you institute more social welfare into society, but it also keeps those who, through no fault of their own, lose out because they're elderly, they're disabled, or they have less cognitive ability than others to be successful, to still be provided for throughout society. For the same reason, in ancient times, in during prehistoric times, people looked out for their elderly because they knew at one point, at some day in their life, they're going to be elderly too, and they're going to want the strong people in their tribe to look out for them too. It's basically the same concept that comes to us from 200,000 years ago, that in hunting in hunter gathering societies, the the young people took care of the elderly because those elderly were once the young thriving people that kept their tribe alive and thriving as well. And now in their elder years, they are to be provided for just as they will want to be provided for once they reach those elderly years as well. That's the same basic concept to social welfare today. So it's not a contradiction to say that yes, government welfare programs destroyed the black community, while allowing to say that the concept of social welfare in economics is something that is needed in a stable society. So he said, I don't want the feds to do any more than the Constitution says they can. Well, not to be look, I'm not. I know you're gonna you might get you might get pissed off at me for saying this, but honestly, most people have never even read the Constitution. Most people think the Constitution is just that little thing that they downloaded and printed out, just like a few pages, and then they stick it in their wallet or their whatever. The U.S. Constitution is a book that's about 1,000 pages long. I doubt most people have ever read through the entire U.S. Constitution. I highly doubt it. If you don't think that the founding fathers thought about these things back then, you weren't paying attention. Between the time when we were still dealing with the Articles of Confederation, and then they held the first constitutional convention, well, the second constitutional convention, got rid of the Articles and Convention and just rewrote the entire laws of the land, which became the U.S. Constitution, starting with the Bill of Rights, which they argued over that because half of them thought we don't need a Bill of Rights, that the Bill of Rights should be this is why we can't just go by what the Constitution itself says, because originally half of the framers of the Constitution didn't even want the Bill of Rights because they thought that the Bill of Rights should already be common sense, that people should already know that these things are covered by the Constitution. Then the other half was like, no, we need to actually specify what these Bill of Rights are, because if they're not actually written down, people will say that these things don't exist. So they wrote down so they, through a lot of uh, hand wringing, they decided to finally write down the Bill of Rights, the most important aspects of the Constitution, because half of the framers knew that if these weren't actually specified in the Constitution, they would not be utilized. Also, the framers knew that they couldn't know everything. This is why the Constitution is a living document. It is meant to be uh, changed with time, and they gave us two ways to do so. You know, also they so either through, you know, an amendment, because three fourths of Congress, both the House, three-fourths of the House and three-house of the Senate agreed to an amendment, or three-eighths of the states, which I believe would be about 38 states, would would agree to a national convention. In that case, a national convention could literally lead to the entire overwrite of the U.S. Constitution. And again, some of the framers believed, even back then, that the Constitution should go undergo a constant rewrite every every generation or so. Putting that political science class to use, right? But um, the point being is that you can't just say, well, whatever the Constitution says is what we should give people, and anything outside of that, we don't. Because again, the framers didn't think of everything, and they knew that they couldn't think of anything because they knew times would change and that there were things that would happen that they couldn't account for in their day and time. And again, on top of that, even if you say let's go by what the Constitution says, almost no one has read the entire Constitution, because, like I said, it's not just those few pages that everyone likes to quote. The actual Constitution is thousands of pages long, and you can order one. People can order them online. I don't think it's free, but you can. But it's easy to buy an actual copy of the U.S. Constitution, and I guarantee you, it reads longer than a G.R.R. Martin novel. It is thousands of pages long. Ours says, I don't care how much corruption or crime other countries have. I don't think we have an acceptable amount here. I'm an isolationist. I'm not talking about isolationist versus interventionism. I'm talking about my my point earlier was the fact that you there's no government that goes without fraud and that is exempt from having fraud and waste, because that's just a byproduct of having a government that's run by people. Unless you want it run by AI, there will always be fraud and waste inherent in any government because it's run by people, and people inherently have vices. Again, unless you're an anarchist, and like I said, too many libertarians run the risk of sounding like anarchists when it comes to the government, and it's just not tenable because one, the size of our country means we need a larger government by by virtue of the size of our nation. Also, because we there has never been a successful libertarian government. There's no historical case of a successful libertarian government because they don't work. Or as a successful business owner, I can't accept any level of inefficiency. Any process can be streamlined. I don't think so. You cannot want any inefficiency, but there's always inefficiency. I mean, just look at the law of thermodynamics. I mean, yes, I don't want to go into the physics route, but there's always going to be any inefficiency within a system because humans run it, and humans are not perfect. I think to think otherwise is just unrealistic because you're dealing with other people. All people have different motives, different levels of ability, and different levels of tolerance for things that they can handle or can't. And look, people are imperfect. Unless you want a government run by AI, there will always be inefficiency. And I guarantee you that you don't want a government run by AI because we have literally dozens of dystopian science fiction movies talking about why we don't want AI to run the world. So, all right, says I think anything outside of the Constitution should be left to the states to decide. Far from an he said I'm far from an anarchist. I firmly believe in law and order and do see a need and use for government. Yeah, but you're saying just for the use of law enforcement and defense. Like I said, that is the libertarian position that government should only be for defense and law enforcement, and that everything outside of that is uh is basically parochial. Is you know, but I just find it untenable to think that we don't have that the government is not going to be used for keeping society coharmonious. You have Government has to also also deal in soft power, not just defense and law. There has to be soft power as well. Soft power comes through providing for your citizens. What's the point of having a government besides, for defense and law, if not to main give us the ability to pursue life, liberty, and you know, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's provided through the government, and that cannot be only be done through military and law enforcement. You have to give There has to be some sort of social welfare, even back then, in the 1700s. Like, and we've had many Supreme Court cases that came out of that, as a result of different sorts of fights with the government on what they should and what they should not be doing for us as citizens, starting all the way with Shay's rebellion, right? And so on and so on. So anyway, I I think we came to a heat with that. Great, great, great. That was a great debate, though. Thank you. I need to go to sleep. um, I agree. Federal government is too big. Again, we don't disagree that there's inefficiency, fraud, waste, corruption, and I think we both agree that it should be reduced. What I'm saying is, you don't you don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. That's I hate to keep using cliches, but as I get tired, I sound more cliched. I'm sorry, but you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We can we can reduce federal bureaucracy and such. That was the point of Doge. I was completely on board with what Doge was doing. What I don't want to be doing though is cutting off social welfare, because the least capable of us in society need still to be provided for, not just for the moral reasons, but for the pragmatic reasons that I spelled out earlier. And again, welfare left to the state does not make it more efficient, because, like I said, it's usually been the state welfare systems that have hurt poor people and destroyed black communities. It wasn't on the federal level. It was usually at the state level. The federal, I think you misunderstand. The federal's role is just to subsidize these state programs. It is the state programs that are making the decisions. It is the state. It is. If I was to find blame, I'm going to find blame with the state systems, because they are the ones who are actually managing these people, or mismanaging these people rather. It's not the federal. The federal's role is basically to subsidize these programs that are usually met out on either state or the state or local level. So anyway, let's be mindful of what happens with Snap next, uh, with the looting. Again, be mindful of your surroundings when you guys go shopping. If you see people acting a little suspicious, assume that they are suspicious. Um, Until then, like I said, benefits will be allegedly returning. I know they will be here in Maryland because of emergency funding, and apparently the federal will be as well. But there will be a delay, and until then, we should expect some people are going to be trying to take advantage of the situation by trying to maybe rob or loot. But I don't want to keep continue talking specifically about welfare reform. My point was to talk about the problems of the SNAP benefits being cut off as it stands today, and how that could lead to um, political violence, or social, or just local, or violence on the local level. People trying to get food either by stealing from people, or looting stores. Um, and like I said, just be mindful. They're gonna, and they're all, and we know how criminals think. Criminals are like animal predators. They're gonna target the vulnerable. So they're gonna target women. They're gonna target elderly people. So if you're elderly, if you're a woman, or if you're married, or you have parents, elderly parents, elderly grandparents, be mindful of them, that they could be vulnerable targets right now for looters, able-bodied people who should be in the military, who rather steal because they're getting their food stamps cut off. I I think we can both agree to that. Are um, but he said, I enjoyed the conversation, brother. Keep aware and stay safe. Thank you. Same to you. and everyone else out there. Take it easy, guys.